Why's that thing at my table? We don't have space for her." The words didn't just land, they sliced. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The fork in my hand paused mid-air, a small piece of roasted carrot trembling at its tip. Around me, the soft hum of polite dinner chatter collapsed into nothing. Silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Tell me something. Have you ever been erased in a room where you're still sitting? I didn't look up right away. No. I let the silence stretch. Let it settle over the table like dust no one wanted to acknowledge. Then slowly, I lifted my eyes. Marianne stood across from me, my daughter-in-law, 42, perfectly composed as always. Her posture rigid, her expression tight with something she didn't bother to hide anymore. Disgust maybe, or fear dressed as control. Her finger was still pointed at me, not subtle, not mistaken. Me, Zerelda Von, 74 years old, sitting at the far end of a table that used to feel like mine. My plate rested neatly in front of me. Untouched, steam fading into the air. I had dressed carefully for this evening. Navy fabric, pressed smooth, hair pinned just right. Not for them, for this moment. You're probably wondering, why didn't I say anything? Why didn't I defend myself? Because I already knew something they didn't. And timing matters. My son, Halric, sat 2 chairs down, 45 years old, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes glued to his plate like it might save him. He hadn't spoken. Not when she pointed, not when she spoke, and not when she called me that thing. Strange, isn't it? The silence of someone who should speak the loudest. And then there was Elsie, 16, half present, her phone in hand. But even she had stopped scrolling now, watching, listening, waiting. The air thickened. Marianne exhaled sharply, lowering her hand but not her gaze. She shouldn't be here, she added, quieter this time, but somehow worse. I smiled, not wide, not warm, just enough, because this was exactly how it needed to begin, and just as she opened her mouth again, ready to push further, to finish what she started, a voice cut through the room. She's not leaving. Not loud, not rushed, but absolute. Every head turned, not toward me, toward the doorway, and I didn't need to look to know who had finally arrived, because the moment had come, and now there would be no stopping it. She's not leaving. That voice changed the room. You know those moments when the air shifts before anyone even moves. This was one of them. Marianne's face tightened first. Halric's head snapped up. Even Elsie straightened in her chair, her phone slowly lowering to the table. I turned then. In the doorway stood Corvin Dast, 51, wearing a charcoal coat, still damp from the evening mist. He looked like the kind of man who never rushed and never repeated himself. Calm, trim, controlled. His eyes scanned the room once, and when they reached me, he gave the smallest nod. Not a greeting, a confirmation. Marianne recovered first, of course. She always did when an audience was present. You weren't invited either, she said, folding her arms. Corvin stepped inside and closed the door behind him with a quiet click. That didn't seem to stop anyone else from deciding who belongs here. Sharp, clean, no wasted words. I could feel Halric shrinking beside the silence. He knew Corvin, not well, but enough. Enough to understand this wasn't an accident. Enough to know that if Corvin had walked into this house tonight, then something had already been set in motion. "Mother," Halric said at last, though the word sounded stiff in his mouth like it had gone unused too long. "What is this?" I looked at him then, really looked. The same grey eyes he'd had as a boy, the same habit of avoiding them when the truth sat too close. "That depends," I said evenly. "How much of it would you like?" said out loud. Marianne let out a hard, humourless laugh. "Don't play games." She was not invited. "I received a letter," I replied, glancing at my folded napkin before meeting her eyes again. "A very clear one. I didn't send a letter." "I know." That landed. For the first time she hesitated. So did Elsie. She looked from Marianne to me, then to Corvin, sensing what younger people often sense first. The crack in a story adults have been performing too long. Then Corvin reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a cream-coloured envelope. Marianne's expression changed when she saw it. Recognition, fast, unmistakable, and suddenly the room was no longer reacting to my presence. It was reacting to what that envelope meant. Corvin held it between two fingers, then placed it gently on the tablecloth beside my plate. "No one's confused," he said. "Not really." Halric went pale. I set down my fork and folded my hands. Then I looked directly at my son and spoke the words he had spent years outrunning. "Tell them, Halric." His mouth parted, but no sound came out, because if he told the truth now, everything at this table would change. Halric didn't speak, and sometimes silence is louder than anything else in the room. You could feel it spreading, thick, suffocating. Marianne turned toward him slowly, her confidence cracking at the edges for the first time that night. "Tell us what?" she pressed, sharper now. "Halric, what is she talking about?" He stepped back instead of answering. Actually stepped back. Have you ever watched someone retreat from their own life in real time? That's what it looked like. His shoulders caved inward, his eyes darting anywhere but toward me, toward the truth. Corvin didn't wait. "If he won't say it," he said calmly, stepping closer to the table, "then I will." Marianne straightened, clinging to control like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Go ahead," she said. "I'd love to hear this." She thought this was still a performance. It wasn't. Corvin placed a thick folder on the table. Not dramatic, not forceful, just final. The kind of quiet action that carries weight because it doesn't need to announce itself. I didn't look at it. I already knew every page inside. Marianne hesitated, but only for a second. Then she reached forward and opened it, and that's when it happened, that shift, confusion first. Her brows pulled together as her eyes scanned the first page. Then disbelief. A small shake of her head. Then something deeper, something colder. What is this?" she whispered. Corvin answered without pause. "Legal records, filed, processed, and finalized." Halric closed his eyes. Elsie leaned forward. "What does that even mean?" Corvin's gaze never left Marianne. "It means the house you're living in isn't yours." The words didn't echo. They dropped, heavy, absolute. Marianne blinked rapidly, flipping through pages now, faster, desperate. "That's not possible. We bought this house. Halric." Her voice broke on his name. Slowly, painfully slowly. She turned toward him. "You told me everything was transferred. You said it was done." Halric's lips parted, and this time he did speak. "I lied." There it was, not loud, not dramatic, just irreversible. Marianne recoiled like she'd been struck. You lied? About this? Her voice rose now, cracking under the pressure. Why would you lie about something like that? No one answered, because the truth behind that lie was far worse than the lie itself. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands against the edge of the table, and then, gently, almost kindly, I gave her the piece she was missing. Because if you knew the truth, I said, meeting her eyes fully now, you never would have let me through the door. The room went still again. Even breathing felt too loud. I let that settle. Then I added, just enough to tighten the noose around the moment. And tonight, I needed to be here. Marianne's face drained of colour, because now, finally, she understood. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't confusion. This was planned. And whatever was coming next, it wasn't over. Ah, you planned this. Marianne's voice came out thinner than before, like something inside her had already started to collapse. I didn't rush to answer. Have you noticed how people expect denial when they're afraid? How they cling to it? I gave her none. Yes, I said. Simple, clean. The words settled, heavier than any argument could have. Elsie shifted in her seat, her voice cutting in, uncertain now. Dad, what's going on? She looked at Halric like she was seeing him for the first time, not as her father, but as someone unreliable. Halric didn't answer her. He couldn't. So I did. You deserve to hear it properly, I told her, my tone even, almost gentle, not in fragments. Marianne shook her head, backing away from the table. No, you don't get to explain anything in my house. I stood then, not quickly, not aggressively, but deliberately, and that was enough to silence her. Years ago, I began, your father made a decision. I glanced briefly at Halric before returning my gaze to Elsie. He declared me unfit to manage my own affairs. Elsie's eyes widened. What? He filed for legal guardianship, I continued. Temporary, justified under concern. I let that word linger for a moment. Concern that I was no longer capable of making sound decisions. That's not, Halric started, but his voice faltered under the weight of his own past. It was approved, I said, which gave him control over my finances, my property. I paused, just long enough for it to sink in. This house included. Marianne's breathing grew shallow. You told me that was permanent. She snapped at Halric. I tilted my head slightly. It wasn't. Corvin stepped in then, his voice precise. Guardianship orders like that require renewal, documentation, evaluation. I nodded once. He didn't renew it. Silence. The kind that feels like the ground shifting beneath your feet. Marianne stared at me, realization dawning in slow, painful increments. So, everything, all of this, was never yours, I finished. Halric finally looked up, desperation creeping into his voice. I thought it was easier, he said. You were difficult, controlling. I met his gaze without flinching. So you removed me. I stabilized things, he insisted weakly. You erased me, I corrected. Corvin reached into the folder again and slid a single document across the table. It stopped just in front of Marianne. She looked down and froze. Eviction notice, Corvin said calmly. 30 days. Her head snapped up. You can't do this now, not like this, not over dinner. I held her gaze. But you could, I asked quietly. That landed harder than anything else, because now, finally, the echo of her words returned, that thing at my table. I took a slow breath, letting the moment sharpen. "You forgot something, Marianne," I said. She didn't respond, didn't move. "This was never your table." A pause. Then, with quiet finality, "It was always mine." And for the first time that night, no one argued, because there was nothing left to deny, only what came next. So what actually happened? Let me lay it out plainly, because by now you deserve the full picture. Years ago, Halric didn't just distance himself from me. He removed me, legally. Filed documents claiming I was no longer capable of managing my life. Temporary guardianship, they called it. Clean, clinical, convincing, and for a time it worked. He gained control over everything. My accounts, my assets, this house. But here's what he counted on: that I wouldn't notice the expiration, that I wouldn't understand the system well enough to take it back, that I would stay quiet. I did stay quiet, just not for the reasons he believed. When the guardianship expired, I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I didn't even step through the front door. Instead, I watched. I let them live here, build their routines, their confidence, their version of ownership. And then I prepared. Corvin helped with that. Every document restored, every record corrected, and every legal thread pulled tight until there was nothing left for them to stand on. And tonight wasn't revenge, it was timing. Back at the table, no one spoke for a long while after the notice was set down. You could feel the shift, like something invisible had been removed, and all that remained was truth. Marianne was the first to move. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked structure now. No control, no certainty. "It is," Corvin replied simply, and it was. The consequences came quickly after that night. Legally, the eviction process moved forward without resistance. There was nothing to contest. Everything had been filed correctly, reinstated cleanly. Socially, the story spread faster than they expected. Family members who had once kept their distance began asking questions. Halric didn't have answers that held up. Personally, that's where it settled deepest. Elsie stopped speaking to them for nearly a week. When she did, it wasn't the same. Something had shifted in how she saw them, especially her father. As for Marianne, control had always been her foundation. Without it, there wasn't much left to hold on to. And Halric? He came back once, stood in the doorway where Corvin had stood. Didn't step inside. "I didn't think you'd go this far," he said. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You already did," I told him. He didn't come back again. Weeks passed. The house grew quiet. And one evening, I sat at the same table again, same chair, same polished surface beneath my hands. But everything felt different, lighter. A cup of tea rested in front of me this time. Warm, untouched for a moment. Before I finally lifted it, Corvin stood near the window, glancing out into the dimming light. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I considered that carefully, not quickly, not emotionally. Then I gave him my answer. No. I looked down the length of the table, at the empty chairs, the absence of noise, the stillness that had returned not as tension, but as peace. Then I picked up my fork, and this time I ate.